So there's a huge bill making its way through the US government, and frankly, it's splitting the crypto world right down the middle. We're talking about HR 3633. The whole debate really boils down to one simple but really profound question. Is a bad law actually better than having no law at all? Let's break it down.
Well, on one side, you've got people like Brad Garlinghouse from Ripple. Their argument is pretty straightforward. Right now, the US crypto industry is just stuck in this chaotic gray zone, getting hit with what they call regulation by enforcement. Without clear rules, companies are tied up in these super expensive multi-year lawsuits, never really sure if what they're building is even legal. So for them, any kind of clear framework, even if it's not perfect, is a massive step forward. It gives them the predictability they need to keep talent in the US, get investment, and, actually compete on a global scale.
But then you have the other side. And this is where people like Cardano founder Charles Hoskinson come in. He's arguing that this bill isn't just flawed, it's a potential trap, one that's actually designed to give regulators an insane amount of power to just crush innovation. And that right there is the central fight we're going to deconstruct in this explainer. Okay, so let's get into the bill itself. HR 3633, officially known as the Digital Asset Market Clarity Act. To really get why it's so controversial, we have to look at how it's actually supposed to work, and why critics like Hoskinson see some serious danger hiding in the fine print.
And you gotta understand, this isn't just some small tweak to existing rules. This bill is proposing a total, fundamental redesign of how every single new crypto project is treated from the get-go, right from the second it's created in the United States.
So what is this massive redesign? Well, it all boils down to the single most critical idea in the entire bill, the concept that every new digital asset begins its life, by default, as one very specific thing. And that thing is called an investment contract asset. What this means, in plain English, is that any new crypto project that has a founding team behind it is automatically treated as a security. So the key takeaway here is, from day one, it's under the very strict control of the SEC.
So check out the journey a project has to go on. First, it launches, and bam, it's a security. That means no trading on exchanges, no real liquidity. Then the team has to go hat in hand to the SEC and ask to graduate to being a commodity. But to do that, they have to prove their project is what this bill calls a mature blockchain.
And this is where we hit the really tricky part, the definitions. A mature blockchain has to be sufficiently decentralized and not under common control. But here's the kicker. The bill doesn't actually define what those terms mean. It leaves it totally up to the regulators to interpret. And that right there, that's where the critics see a massive trap being set.
So let's get into the heart of Hoskinson's argument. He lays out 4 specific ways, he calls them attack vectors, that he believes a hostile SEC could use this vague language to basically trap new projects as securities forever.
Okay, attack vector number 1 is all about good old-fashioned bureaucracy. It's called the substantially complete trap, and it's a playbook for how an agency can use procedural games to stick a project in permanent limbo.
Here's how this could play out. The bill says the SEC gets 60 days to review a project's petition, but what if the SEC just decides to create a 30-day pre-review period before that 60-day clock even starts? Then they could use some massive 500-page internal rulebook to find some tiny issue, and on day 59, they send a deficiency letter. That pauses the clock. Then they can just do it again and again and again, trapping the project in this bureaucratic nightmare forever.
All right, the next one gets a little more technical. This one is all about that phrase, common control, and how it could be twisted to attack the very heart of how open source software gets built.
So imagine this. The SEC could just decide that common control means a bunch of developers all contributing code to the same project on GitHub. They can invent a metric, let's call it a coordination coefficient, and if that score goes above a certain level, a level they get to set, they could rule the project as centralized. It wouldn't even matter if the developers intended to coordinate, the pattern alone would be enough proof. Normal collaboration suddenly becomes evidence against you.
This leads us to attack vector number 3, what the source calls the unfulfillable burden of proof. Basically, the bill says the project has to prove it's decentralized. But critics worry the SEC could just make up standards that are literally impossible to meet.
You can see how this becomes a total catch-22, right? The SEC could say, prove to us that no single group controls more than 20% of your network. Well, to do that, you'd probably need KYC data on every big wallet holder, which is impossible on a public blockchain. Or they could demand a report from a certified blockchain forensic auditor, a type of auditor that doesn't even exist yet because the SEC hasn't created the certification for it. It's a task designed to be failed.
And that brings us to the final attack vector he outlines, a test that pits a crypto's real-world use against market speculation in a way that could make even the most successful projects look like failures.
See, the bill basically gives the SEC a blank check to define what utility even means. Hoskinson argues they could just create a rule that says over half of a token's price increase has to come from pure on-chain use, not from people trading and speculating on it. He claims that by that standard, pretty much every crypto out there, maybe even Bitcoin, would fail that test.
Okay, so if all this is possible, what's the end game here? What are the long-term consequences for the crypto industry in the US if this bill passes as is? Well, the source paints a pretty grim picture.
The big fear is that while the old guard projects, the XRPs, the ETHs, the ADAs, they might get a pass, but every new American project would be stuck in that illiquid security trap. That would push all the new ideas, all the talent, and all the money offshore. DeFi developers would be left completely in the dark, and ultimately, the US would just give up its leadership position in this entire industry.
So when you boil it all down, this whole thing really comes down to a single fundamental question: trust. Can we, and should we, trust regulators with this much vague, undefined power? This quote from the source really just hits the nail on the head. The argument isn't just that the bill is flawed. The argument is that this bill doesn't create new, clear rules at all. Instead, it just takes the same adversarial approach the industry has been fighting against and makes it the law of the land.
So, if this bill is the problem, what's the solution? Well, the source suggests a totally different way of thinking. Instead of this security by default model, you could have a principles-based approach. Modernize the old laws from the 1930s, create a whole new category for digital securities, and, this is the most important part, build in objective, clear standards with a real appeals process. That way, you're not just relying on the goodwill of future regulators.
And that really leaves us with one final thought. This whole fight over H.R. 3633 isn't just about one bill. It's about how we want to be regulated. If you think of regulators as the referees in a game, what happens when you pass a law that lets them move the goalposts whenever they want? This bill bets everything on trusting the ref. The question is that a bet worth taking?